any leader who's worth their snuff will tell you that the most important aspect of leading a team is having trust.
Mm-hmm. Welcome to the Leadership Initiative, where we explore the art and science of leadership through thought-provoking conversations with experts, thought leaders, and change makers. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting out on your leadership journey, this podcast is designed to provide you with the tools and inspiration you need to lead with purpose and make a meaningful difference. Hello, everyone. I am Knox Shanahan, Academic Programs Manager of the Dean's Leadership Academy at Fisher Leadership Initiative. Today's guest is Adam Othman. Our guest today is an alumnus of the Fisher College of Business here at Ohio State University. Adam also graduated with a Dean's Leadership Academy Certificate in Leadership from the Fisher Leadership Initiative in 2019. He currently works as an executive zone business manager for Frito-Lay in Columbus, and will be speaking with us about his varied leadership positions and philosophy. Adam, first of all, thank you so much for being here.
So happy to be here, Jen, and really looking forward to digging into what I know to be our favorite topic, leadership.
Absolutely. And for a little context for listeners, there was a time some 5+ years ago when Adam was a student in my class. So it's very exciting to have you back, and I want to just dive right in.
Sure.
So at Fisher, we emphasize understanding values and understanding how to leverage strengths and weaknesses. And I'd love to begin by asking you if you can walk me through your leadership philosophy and how you've applied it to your current role. So I'll let you take that away.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we dive in, I want to step back for just a second. Yes, I was a student in your class. So much of what I'm bringing, to the table these days, and so much of my leadership philosophy stems back from that time at Ohio State, and part of that impact is from you. So thank you. Everyone listening must be said, right? So, but a little bit about my leadership philosophy, how it kind of has developed, how it stems into my current role and some of my previous roles. So, put simply, I like to say that I exist at the intersection of servant and transformational-based leadership. Servant leadership, while I understand nowadays is maybe a little overused in its terminology, is incredibly impactful. So as a servant leader, my focus is always, how do I serve and impact the highest priority needs of whatever team that I'm helping lead? So currently, I'm the executive zone business manager in Columbus for Frito-Lay. My focus is to serve the highest priority needs of a very diverse workforce, ranging from 400 plus frontline associates, over 23 managers, right, in our zone, helping them develop their process, helping ensure that we're staying accountable to our sales plans, our selling expense, so on and so forth. Part of my job as a servant leader is to really listen and understand what the different needs of each of these individual people are, as well as the working populations that I'm serving. Yeah. I would note that as a servant leader, what is the highest priority need may not always be the highest priority want, but it very much remains an important focus in my leadership. Coupled with that, though, as I'm serving the organizations and the teams that I work with, transformational leadership manifests in my focus to transform and develop the people that I'm touching. So I'm a big believer that as you're serving people, as you're working with your teams, you need to be asking yourself, how are we developing and refining the people that we're working with as well? A lot of that kind of ties back to my philosophy. Underscoring all of that, my leadership approach, my leadership philosophy is very values-oriented. And a lot of that work actually started at Fisher many years ago as I started questioning and being questioned about what truly are my values and how do those manifest into my leadership. So as I look at my own philosophy of serving people, transforming and developing, I've come to integrate my values into kind of my everyday approach of how that leadership philosophy manifests into action.
Yes, beautifully said. I'm curious, since it's been 5 years since you've been here at Fisher, how has that leadership philosophy changed, or what are some key lessons that you've picked up along the way?
That's a wonderful question. And, when it's first asked, I think a lot of people would hear it and assume so much must have changed in those 5 years. And what I would say is, fundamentally, I don't think my leadership philosophies have changed. I've always been firmly passionate about trying to impact the organizations and the teams that I serve. I've always been very focused on a servant and transformational leadership approach, allowing my values to underscore what I do. What I think has changed more so is understanding the different leadership populations and how those philosophies, I don't want to use the word conflict per se, but how they may be challenged, right, when you're approaching a different a team or work group. So for instance, when I started my career, I was working with a team of frontline route associates. At Frito-Lay, at PepsiCo, anybody will tell you that our frontline teams are the lifeblood of our organization. Without them, nothing happens. They move and shake our business. They sell our product. They are the everyday face of Frito-Lay. When I started, however, I came in as a, bushy-tailed, excited, young, emergent leader. I came in with what I believed to be all the answers. I took my leadership classes. I got the fancy leadership certificate. I've gotten to lead teams, in college. And I found myself approaching the workforce at times and trying to not push my ideologies on them by any means, but to kind of push my philosophy upon them in a way that made sense for me. And what I quickly realized is that while there was a lot of validity, at least I like to believe, to how I was trying to lead, and I think that there was some effectiveness in that, what I was finding is that when you applied my philosophies realistically, that the workforce always didn't respond to it the most effective way. And the main reason being is that leadership may be simple at times, but people are very complex. Every team you lead is very complex. Leading a team of, young college students is very different than leading a team of frontline route associates. They have different motivations, different incentives, different focuses. They want different things than I might out of my job or my life. It's not that any of these things are bad or good, or they're just different, right? And so I think the biggest thing that changed for me from the start of my career to now is understanding that I need to start, yes, remain in my values, remain in my philosophies, but I need to start by understanding who is the person receiving what I'm going to deliver, and how might I modify what I'm doing a bit to better respond to that workforce.
Yeah, that is excellent advice, both for new emerging leaders and also for leaders in new situations and new roles.
And applicable at all stages of the career, right?
Yeah.
I mean, anyone who might be listening to this, you might be 2 years in, you might be 20 years in. Your next role may be putting you in front of a brand new challenge, a brand new team. And the question may be, how do I need to modify what I'm very comfortable in to better suit the person I'm serving?
Yes, absolutely. It's not just the people that are changing. The world is constantly changing. We're constantly changing, and staying on top of all of that, being agile is quite quite a trick. And so actually I have a quick follow-up question about that.
Please.
In terms of agility, you've had a few different positions. You've kind of moved up the ranks relatively quickly, not surprisingly, at Frito-Lay. And I'm just curious how you've been able to adjust to the different roles and different positions, because from what I understand, they have been quite different and call to different leadership competencies.
Absolutely. So I think if I were to boil it down for the sake of this conversation, my first role was very direct leadership focused. I was responsible for managing a team of route sales representatives, responsible for helping them develop their business, develop their routes, so on and so forth. Transitioned into an account manager role where I was focusing more on indirect leadership, right? How might I lead people through influence to get agendas and strategies across the goal line? Then now transitioning into almost a bit of a hybrid leadership role where I do have a direct report, but additionally, I'm indirectly responsible for influencing and impacting the zone at large, both the front line as well as their managers. The way to stay agile in those transitions, first, is to recognize that agility is needed, right? You need to be open to a different skill set, a different way of thinking. I remember when I first transitioned into my account manager role, that was my first big transition in my career. My boss at the time, he had given me the feedback that, hey, you're doing things well, you're working really hard, but I need you to think about how we go to business in a different way now. You're going from executional priority, to strategic priority. You're going from focusing just on your team to a much larger book of business, to a much larger scope. You're thinking about the customer, the business, the impact in a much different way. Yeah. That was also a trigger for me to say my leadership needs to shift, right? Whether you're talking about personal leadership, how we lead ourselves, or how we lead others, if the role is changing, if the strategic focus is changing, the way the leader must show up must also change. Yes. And so I think that understanding, that feedback I got was a bit of a catalyst for me to start thinking more critically during these transitions. How do I need to show up differently?
Yeah. You've already touched on this, but I'm curious because one of the top things that people say they're looking for in leaders today is trustworthiness. And I'm curious how you go about building trust with teams as a new leader, or just cultivating a certain amount of mutual respect among teams in its changing environment.
Absolutely. So any leader who's worth their snuff will tell you that the most important aspect of leading a team is having trust. If you don't have trust, it doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter how functionally effective you are. It doesn't matter how many great leadership theories you learned in college. If your people don't trust you, if your teams don't trust you, and not just your word, right, but your ability, your thoughtfulness, trusting you as an advocate when they're not in the room, but then also in turn, you as a leader being able to trust your team. If you don't have that reciprocity, it doesn't matter. Hang up your coat and go home. Nothing else matters.
Right.
Ways to build that. Right? And this could be at the beginning of your career. This could be well into your career. Most important thing, number one, is listening. My grandfather taught me at a very young age, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You should listen twice as much as you speak. I think this is an excellent leadership insight. You're walking into a new team, walking into a new organization, a new problem, whatever it may be. You are new to this situation. Listen. Because there's people who existed in this space prior to you entering it. Yeah. And honoring what they have learned and brought to the table is integrally important to get any level of respect, trust, or buy-in with anything you're going to deliver. So I think that's one, is listening. And listening intently, asking good questions. I think number two is meeting people where they are, not expecting them to meet you where you are. So I think a lot of times, especially with young leaders, but I don't think exclusively to young leaders, they come into a team and they say, I am here, I have this, that, and the other thing. I need you all to rise to where I'm at. When in reality, it's, again, let's go back to servant leadership. I'm here to serve your highest priority needs. I need to go where your needs are, not where my desires are. And that's a hard pill for, I think, a lot of leaders to swallow. Well, I need to go where they are. So, for example, when I started my career, one of the primary focuses I had early on, and I will say that, organizationally, I know Frito-Lay pushes this a lot in the field because it's the way it really should be done, is to go out and work start to finish with every single one of your employees that you're going to be overseeing. Yeah. This has a multitude of impacts. Number one, it helps you learn. right? You're new to this. You don't understand how we necessarily go to market. Understanding from the ground up how we kind of go to business is important. That's number one. Number two, many of these people, in my case at least, were doing the job longer than I've been alive. So they have a lot of insights and ability and know-how that I can learn from and see. I think it's also important to respect and honor that, right? If you want to have respect and be honored, you must first respect and honor people.
Yeah.
So I think taking the time to understand them is important. I think third, it builds credibility with them to show them that, one, I'm never going to ask you to do something I'm not willing to do.
Yep.
Two, I understand and I'm willing to do what you do. And three, what you're doing is important.
Yes.
Right? What you're doing is important. When you take the time to meet people where they're at, you tell them, I'm not above what you're doing. This isn't something I'm dictating. I'm telling you this is an important thing to me in the organization, which in the case of the example that I'm outlining, it is.
Yeah.
It's crucially important. I think additionally, after you've listened, you've met people where they are, you're doing kind of the work with them, there's an old saying, do what you say you will do. I think that's massive as you're building trust and credibility.
Yeah.
Okay? Critically important. You're not going to have all the answers. People know that. They just want to know that the commitments you're making are commitments you're making. They want to know that the promises you're voicing will be delivered on. If you promise someone follow-up, give them follow-up. If you have an expectation, lean into it. Stay consistent with it. Whatever it may be, if you say that you're going to do something, let your word be a reflection of the value of your leadership, right? And then the final thing I'd say, because I could talk about this question probably for 3 hours, is that we often ask before we give. And I think that's a really dangerous seat to sit in as a leader. We often ask before we give. If you want to build credibility, let your team know that the work and their word is credible. If you want people to trust you, this is controversial with some people, trust them first.
Right.
Put faith in them first. You want people to be in a vulnerable space with you, be vulnerable with them. If you want people to exercise compassion, first exercise compassion towards them.
Yes.
You have to be willing to give, especially your team, especially the people you're charged with. You have to be willing to give them what you hope to receive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that is so beautifully said, and it's something that is so easy for leaders to miss the mark on, and reminding ourselves of that again and again is so important. Because this isn't something that's a one and done. You're constantly having to reinvest and trust where there may be shaky ground. And I'm just curious, we can do everything right as leaders, but sometimes there are still difficult conversations that need to be had. And a lot of leaders struggle with this. It's very tempting to avoid confrontation or avoid difficult conversations. And so I just be curious to know what your advice is around having difficult conversations, whether that's discipline or whether that's just a sales, pep talk or something like that. How can you have a difficult conversation with somebody in a way that is actually constructive?
Fantastic question. I think, if you ask anybody who's good at giving difficult feedback or having difficult conversations, they'll give you different advice. And that's probably true with leading too, right? Everyone will give you different advice. I would say the first place I would start, especially as an emergent leader or to somebody who's on a new team, is if the opportunity is present, I would first watch and listen to a difficult conversation being had with somebody or that team. It can be really eye-opening to see how organic and natural these conversations can be if you've never had one before, right? So I think that's number one. I think a lot of people put the pressure on themselves to figure it out because oftentimes, right, we throw leaders into the lion's den when the lion is happy and fed and friendly. So, the leader feels confident and good, like they were able to figure it out by themselves. But then when the conversations get difficult, now they may be afraid to raise their hand because, well, I've been on my own up to this point. Now I have to, how do I figure this out by myself? So that's number one. I'd say take time to listen, watch, get feedback, see how it's done. Be willing to raise your hand and say, I need a little bit of perspective. Two, I think so much of having a difficult conversation is not the conversation. It's everything prior to it.
Okay.
Part of what makes conversations difficult is we didn't do the work to have the difficult conversation. What I mean by that, start with this. Do you fully understand every nook, cranny, and piece of the conversation that's about to be had? So if you're giving a difficult conversation on a performance expectation, do you thoroughly know what the expectations are? Do you know how those have been communicated? Do you know what resources have been given for that person to be successful?
Yep.
Do you know what feedback they've received in the past? Do you know what feedback you're getting from the person who's being impacted by this poor performance? Do you understand the history and the precedent of how these conversations were had? The list goes on and on. It's not just about, can I have a difficult conversation? It's about, have you taken the time to fully understand and honor the person you're about to have a difficult conversation with by taking the time to do your homework? And I know none of us like homework, but have you taken the time to do your homework? If you haven't, I would say, in respect for the person you're going to have the difficult conversation with, you need to first do a little bit of work. That's where I'd start.
Yeah.
I think once you've done that, an important thing to remember with difficult conversations is you need to stay true to your conviction. So I think a lot of times when we're having difficult conversations, we get a little rattled. We think, how is this going to make this person feel? We think, oh my goodness, do I know what I'm talking about? Do I know what's going on? Stop. If you've done the work, if you've taken the time, you've listened, you've been coached, so on and so forth, have a little confidence in yourself. Part of what makes difficult conversations so difficult is we're a little rattled walking in. Don't be rattled. If you've done your homework, there's no reason to not have conviction. I think then part of that difficult conversation, so, not to belabor, we've done the work now, right? We're prepared. We're actually in the conversation. I think it begins, right, by being very clear, open, and honest about what needs to be discussed. I would add one caveat to that to say, in my opinion, most difficult conversations should not be a surprise. Yeah. If you're to the point where a difficult conversation has to happen, I hope that you've been doing the work prior to prepare that person to know that this difficult conversation is inevitable. Yeah. That helps make it a little easier. It's not always possible. Sometimes difficult conversations have to happen with no prep. Sometimes an emergency happens. Sometimes someone creates a situation that you need to now address. But a lot of times we can kind of prepare and build up towards it. So I think that's a large piece of it, right? Is explain the situation, be transparent, lean into your conviction, be very clear, concise, forward. And then this is where it kind of a fork in the road comes in. If the difficult conversation is one where you're trying to have a difficult conversation but develop and bring somebody along, remember that as you're going in, be compassionate in that space, and come with a framework and idea of how they can move forward, and then also encourage them to help you develop that together. Right. That way you understand how to move forward together, right? Make it a dialogue, not a dictation. I think then the other side of it, though, is that if it's a difficult conversation that needs to happen, that isn't a performance expectation or something you're moving forward with, but rather maybe we're moving apart from, so maybe a termination, for example. Stay true to your conviction. Understand that you need to be rock solid in what you're going to deliver and how it's being delivered, and then what the next steps are. Don't leave anything up for interpretation. Be very clear and forward with what needs to happen, but still give that person the space to ask the questions and be listened to and heard. That'll help things go over a little smoother.
Excellent advice, multifaceted advice.
Yeah, I wish it was straightforward and simple, but I think that's the nature of it, right? They're difficult conversations. If it was easy, as go walk in and have it, then
Right.
you wouldn't ask the question, right?
Exactly.
There's a lot of nuance to these things, and I think everybody knows that, and that's part of what elicits a little bit of that anxiety that comes with the difficulty of those conversations.
Yes.
But I think if you're doing the prep work, if you're treating your people the right way, if you're doing the right work on the right timeline consistently, I think difficult conversations surprisingly become a lot less difficult to have.
Right, right. Operating from a place of integrity and developing others will give you that sort of internal confidence. That's very, very well said. Well, Adam, I could talk to you for about 4 hours, I think.
We've probably done it before.
We probably have. But before I let you go, I just wanted to ask, based on your experiences, if you could share whatever you deem as the best advice for emerging leaders or leaders in a new situation over the next few years. We, again, live in times where the way that we're working is changing, the way that we communicate is changing, and I'm just curious from your perspective what you think will be most beneficial for a leader to bring to their position regardless of industry or expertise. What do people need, and how can leaders bring it?
That's a wonderful question, Jen. There's so many good answers. And this is a question that I think more people should ask more leaders. Because I think that you'll get a different answer every time, and every single one of them is probably relevant and impactful. Okay? I would say a few things for emergent leaders to kind of keep in mind. And some of it's non-traditional. Some of it's traditional, some of it's non-traditional. One, I think that there's nothing more important than identifying your values and allowing them to manifest into your actions and remaining consistent with that. That is the true test of your integrity, is how rock solid am I in my values? How convicted am I to what I believe? Yep. Your integrity in your actions ultimately reflects on how principled your leadership is. The world is begging for principled leaders, begging for it. I see it every single day of my career. I see it across other industries. People need principled leaders now more than ever. People true in their conviction, true in their value. Yeah. I think that's one. I think two, this is true at all stages of career. I think especially for emergent leaders, build your support network. I'm not talking about your LinkedIn network. I'm not talking about how many executives do I know or so on and so forth. I'm talking about what people are in your corner and what purpose are they helping you serve in your life. Look at your friends, look at your family, look at your business mentors, your coaches. Make sure that you're surrounding yourself with the right people, because ultimately you cannot be a better leader than you are a person, and you have to build yourself in all aspects and capacities of your life. I think coupled with that, though, I would really encourage people early on in their career or emerging into a new leadership role, find people you value and respect, people you trust, and let them be your truth sayers, let them be your advocates, let them be your mentors, let them be your coaches. None of us know everything, but together we can know a lot of things, right? So take the time to get to know people, build those relationships, and lean into them. I think I'd also remind people that leadership is a privilege, not a right, and that in order to be a really effective leader, no matter the stage of leadership you're in, is to remain humble in your learning. You're a student of leadership before you're a leader. So what are you doing to continuously learn how to bring the best to your team, be impactful for your team, and ultimately leave people better off than you found them? And the final thing I would say, and I have felt this way, I have believed this since my days in college, is that impact is everything. I often look at impact like planting seeds in a garden. We plant seeds in a garden not because we know something will grow, but because we have faith in the fact that something might. That faith is reason enough to keep planting. Impact is not about the bounty, it's about the seed. So I would encourage emergent leaders to think, as I walk into this new stage, this new chapter, this new team, what seeds might I plant? How often can I make an impact in a way that is well received and intended for the person who's receiving it?
Wonderful. I think that you have given us so much in such a short amount of time. And I encourage people to listen to this podcast multiple times because Adam just really gave us a lot of wisdom.
I appreciate that, Jen. I'm flattered.
Thank you so much for coming back. Thank you for being part of the Fisher Leadership Initiative and coming back and lecturing in my classes. So beautiful to see you on your leadership journey. And I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Jen. And I cannot emphasize enough, the privilege is mine. Thank you for your time.
Thanks again for listening. This podcast is presented by the Max M. Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University. For more episodes, find us on Apple, Google, or podcast.osu.edu/leadership initiative. See you next time.